Thank you. Well, I'm so happy to be here. This is such a special homecoming for me. It was over 25 years ago when I landed in the Dallas-Fort Worth airport to study at the University of North Texas. So I would like to take the opportunity to thank Talley and her wonderful team for putting the show together and for all the help. I would like to thank my inspiring teacher, Vernon. It is an incredible opportunity for me to have a concurrent show with him as a way to pay my tribute. And I would like to thank my wife, who is actually here, she's in the other room, but for her support over the years. Too bad she's not hearing this. This exhibition is basically include two parts. One is recent pieces, recent paintings from my theme of the library series, Chinese books and Western books. And there's one piece that's a little bit different in the room is this painting, which is based on a photograph I took in the collection of Tsinghua University in Beijing, where I went to undergraduate school. And these are books that were charred and heavily damaged during the 1940s War of Resistance, during the Japanese occupation. When the university was moving to southern China, the library collection was heavily damaged, and a lot of it was lost due to heavy bombing. So these are two of the few objects that the library was keeping as objects of evidence from the war period. So you can see that this, the books almost have become charcoal, and the edges of the bottom one is charred, and I use some kind of scraping process to show this red undercoat. So, and I don't think I have to say much about these other paintings from the Chinese library series. What I do want to say is that they are based on photographs I took at libraries as I found them, different from like arranging objects like what a traditional still life painter would do. So I'm interested in the space, the atmosphere, the light of the setting, the mise en scène of this image. If you could turn around and look at this group of photographs, I'll give you a little bit of context on this. This is part of my recent project focusing on the history of banned books in China. And I started the idea in 2012, started doing a lot of research, compiling long lists of books banned in various time periods in China. And in 2014, 15, 16, I worked quite intensively on the project. So the first part of the project is a systematic photographic group of pre-modern books. So these are books that were banned during the Ming and Qing dynasties for various reasons. And so I have photographed 118 titles, mainly from two public libraries, one in Beijing, one in Shanghai. And what you are seeing here are 8 titles from the 118. At the Asia Society Museum in New York, I was able to display 13 titles with 30 photographs. So some of the titles will be represented by more than one images. And so I hope to give a sense of the scope or the ambition of the banned book project. And the second part of the project is an installation of acquired books. I've accumulated about 750 of those books, and from the very early 1920s, early 19th century, like 1911, all the way to today. My newest edition was 2010. And so you'll be able to see the installation when you visit the exhibition at the Asia Society, if you travel to the city, it has a long run ending January the 5th. So if you are in the city before then, please don't miss it. The third part of the bamboo project is a documentary film about the process, about my working process, as well as interviews with writers whose books were banned, editors, government officials. Some of them refused to have their image released, and some and a poet, people who had interest in reading history. So the documentary film is necessary to tell stories about these objects and to provide a larger context. So I'm going to leave a file of the film, which is about 45 minutes, with the gallery. And if you are interested, maybe we can figure out something to share it with the audience. But about this group of photos of pre-modern books, first of all, these are documented, they are presented as a life-size photo, 1:1. And the scale could be verified by this ruler position underneath each object. And that's the ruler, contemporary ruler that I brought from the States to China, so that my, if you would, subjectivity or my position from, someone from today. So what would, and of course, besides verifying the scale, of course, you can get the idea of, you want to measure, that's to judge these books, what is my scale, what is good and bad, what is accessible, and what is deemed, okay to be accessible, or what should be forbidden. So in each time I always face the problem of how to select from these 118 titles. So in this particular installation, I wanted to cover the four main categories, the four main reasons of banning in late imperial China. So the first one is would be books banned on religious ground. And so this book here is called, it's a Taoist work that have been banned quite a few times during Qin Dynasty. Of course, this is on religious ground. And on this other end is called the Book Pushing Sketch, 推背图, which is a book of prophecy or deviation, a book that's meant to tell you about future events. And the fall and rise of dynasties, the change of rulership. And you can imagine that all emperors hated it, right? So who wants you to talk about such things? However, it's usually composed of an illustration. In this case, it is handwritten, hand-painted and handwritten. It's a Qin Dynasty edition. Although the history of this book could be traced all the way back to Tang Dynasty, but of course this is the earliest I could find. So you have an enigmatic kind of illustration, and the poem next to it is supposed to give some interpretation of the image to tell you about the future. And when you read the poem, if you do read Chinese, then it's actually more confusing. So everything is enigmatic. So that's a fascinating example of what is once mysterious. Okay, so the second category of books that were banned were on political grounds. For example, maps, books on military strategies. These are, the rulers would not want normal people to access these books, because when you have this knowledge, you can stage rebellion and overthrow the dynasty, right? And so here there's a book of maps protected with wooden cases, and if you look at the style, it relates to certain aspects of Chinese landscape painting in a more kind of graphic way. Here where's the, oh, this is the title of the book is called Bing Lu, a summary of military art. And this particular page shows how to use this big rock canyon to attack a city. You see the city here? And this one is actually hand-painted and written as well. Okay, the third category is books banned on philosophical grounds or banned for scholarship. So this one is called, it's actually notes, accumulated notes during reading of other works by late Ming Dynasty philosopher, a thinker, Gu Yanwu, called 日之录, kind of like a diary about reading. And it's actually hand copied, not by the original author. So it's not a manuscript, but a later hand copy of the philosophical work. And so some of these books they were banned because they challenge orthodox traditional scholarship. For example, some books challenging the more orthodox Confucianism of the Chengzu school would be banned, because that the Chengzu school was what the emperor positioned as sort of the authoritative version. So this is a scholarly, this is Wang Chuanshan, Wang Fuzi, very famous philosopher. And it's a rare book showing actually a portrait of the author here. So the fourth category would be books banned on moral grounds. And you can you know that erotic works have been very popular, but they have been banned over and over again. So here, this is a Qing Dynasty version printed during the Kangxi Emperor reign of the Golden Lotus. You might know about it. An infamous erotic novel with such rich illustrations that you can see. Now, the best known among this group, perhaps, is the Peony Pavilion, a very popular Kunqi opera by Tang Xianzu, the Ming Dynasty playwright. There was recently a contemporary kind of avant-garde version of the Peony Pavilion directed by Bai Xianyong at the Lincoln Center a few years ago. And it has been popular since Ming Dynasty. So this is actually a book. It is a script enough to stage this performance for days. And of course, this is only one of the, you are seeing, one of the many volumes. And this is a famous scene, the opening scene of the beautiful maiden, Du Liniang, dream of meeting a talented young intellectual, Liu Mengmei, and fell in love with him. And in fact, they made love in the dream. So that was so provocative and so, controversial at the time. And so it's a very complicated tragic comedy that fascinated the public for hundreds of years. And I particularly like the illustration style from Ming Dynasty. So this edition that I photographed is a Ming Wanli Emperor reign period from the studio of Huai De Tang. Okay, kind of tongue twisting to get across. So anyway, that's an overview of this group of photos. And some, I have various ways to present these photographs. Another way to do it would be to just present one single title. For example, I have selected 6 images of the Peony Pavilion, and they could be arranged in a sequence or in a grid to tell a full story. So these 6 images are key moments key scenes in the storyline. Okay. If you have any questions, let me know.
Are there any books they still ban, or any subjects? Are all subjects free now to do?
Well, these books are basically now they're accessible at libraries for researchers and students, but the reprinting of some of these titles are still under control. For example, the reprinting, the contemporary printing of the Golden Lotus would not be okay unless it's heavily abridged. Like say, okay, there are versions which includes more of the original content, are only accessible to people with a certain rank at a certain class. So there's still limited access. I remember in the late 1980s, there was a notification from one of the bureaus, the publication press bureau, to control the reprinting of Chinese classics, and not just the Golden Lotus, but some other titles.
I have maybe a comment and a question. I find it interesting that the ruler is so precise, and it's like this is the reality, and then you have all this creativeness around it, and with some of these images, there's the photograph kind of documenting it, and then it's your creation around it. So I like that dynamics. But I guess the question is, how did you get interested in these books, and why books? Is that something from your childhood, or how did you grow to love and be obsessed really with books?
Right. That obsession started from 1993 when not long after coming to the States, to Texas actually. And so at the beginning, I kind of stumbled on this subject, and I was faced by these rows of books in the library when I walk in the narrow aisles. It's everything sort of got together in my mind, this repetition of lines. This is very abstract and architectural from the appearance. So I think abstraction is one thing that I was very interested in, and also these are containers of something intangible, right? There's also something fascinating about it. So, but at the moment when I started the library series in the early 90s, I did not anticipate it for the theme to continue for so long. And for many years, I was more interested in these books, in the physical forms of these books. Sometimes as kind of runes, or kind of they have an architectural kind of presence, the evidence of decay, the kind of the atmosphere of the library. And only until I walk on the later I work on newspapers and world events, and only until when I started the BAM book project, the books are opened up, so you actually get to see the content. But BAM books in particular, I think it's again a fascinating subject for me, because in BAM books you find a lot of kind of the cultural outcast, so to speak. You may find mysterious or obsolete belief systems. You may find protests. You may find unorthodox ways of thinking, and intense emotions, human desires, secret pleasures, so on and so forth. And so this is the kind of what's beyond the norm that is deeply fascinating for me. Yes.
You got 2 teenage plus sons. At home, what's your library like? Do they have e-readers? Do you get a newspaper delivered? I know you love paper. I know you love newspapers. But how do you live it?
Well, I have a modest collection of books, and kind of mixed of different subjects, both in English and Chinese, and they're free to read anything they want. We have a couple of magazines, subscriptions, and they're not newspaper. Not now. As you know, at the moment, we did at some point had newspaper subscriptions. Yeah. So anyway, I must admit that I wish I have more time to read and read more extensively. I always feel like that's not enough. I'm always embarrassed about blind spots in my system of knowledge, if any at all.
Xiaoze, thank you so much. We love having you here.